Stephanie Davenport, a titan of industry at 44, reclined on the plush chaise lounge of her sprawling Scarsdale Estates veranda. The late morning sun, a rare indulgence on her self-granted day off, dappled through the ancient oaks, casting shifting patterns on the flagstone. A gentle breeze, carrying the scent of expensive roses from her meticulously kept garden, did little to soothe the knot of tension perpetually lodged between her shoulder blades. 20 years. 20 years since her father's sudden death had thrust her, a fresh-faced 24-year-old with a law degree she'd never use, into the unforgiving world of international logistics. Davenport Transcontinental was her empire now, a sprawling testament to her grit and acumen. She signed multi-million-dollar deals like other women signed birthday cards, expanded her reach across continents, a queen on a global chessboard. But the crown, she often thought, was forged of the heaviest gold. Her brief reverie was broken by the clink of porcelain. Bill, her husband of 2 decades, ambled out, a vision of leisurely domesticity in his paint-stained linen shirt. He carried 2 steaming mugs of coffee. "Darling," he crooned, his voice smooth as the expensive oils he dabbled with in his studio. His art, a lifelong passion that had yet to yield a single sale. "Decided to embrace the morning calm, have we?" Stephanie managed a thin smile. "Just needed to recalibrate, Bill. Big negotiations tomorrow. I want everything to be flawless." She took the offered mug, the aroma of dark roast a small comfort. "You'll ace it, Steph. You always do," Bill said, planting a perfunctory kiss on her hand before settling beside her. His confidence in her was absolute, born not of understanding her world, but of his complete detachment from it. He'd never worked a day in their marriage, content to pursue his artistic vision while she built their fortune. Their fragile peace was shattered by the roar of an engine and the screech of tires. Max, their 20-year-old son, a whirlwind of restless energy and entitlement, skidded his gleaming red sports car to a halt on the gravel driveway. Thumping bass music pulsed from the vehicle, a jarring counterpoint to the chirping birds. He was the spitting image of his father in looks, but with an added layer of brazen arrogance, a boy man who believed the world owed him a perpetual party. He'd clearly just rolled in from another all-nighter. Stephanie's jaw tightened. The brief illusion of tranquility vanished, replaced by the familiar ache of frustration. This was her life, a gilded cage of responsibility, shared with 2 men who seemed to exist in a different, far more carefree dimension. Stephanie placed her coffee cup on the wrought iron table with a deliberate click, the sound louder than she intended in the suddenly tense air. Max sauntered onto the veranda, sunglasses perched atop his perfectly tousled hair, radiating the unearned confidence of youth and wealth. He reeked faintly of stale champagne and something vaguely floral, probably some nightclub's signature scent. "Back from the land of the living, are we?" Stephanie asked, her voice cool, a stark contrast to the thumping beat still faintly audible from his abandoned car. "Or did you just forget which house was yours this morning?" Max feigned an innocent pout, leaning down to plant a fleeting kiss on the top of her head. "Aw, Mom, don't be like that. I'm 20, you know. A guy's gotta have a little fun. Your little boy's all grown up." He grinned, a flash of white teeth that usually charmed his way out of trouble. "Not today." "Fun that involves disappearing all night and treating this house like a hotel?" she countered, her gaze unwavering. Bill, ever the avoider of conflict, picked at an imaginary speck on his trousers, seemingly fascinated by the weave of the fabric. "Speaking of which," Max said, seamlessly changing the subject, his hand already outstretched, palm up. "Could use a little top-up, Mom. My account's looking a bit anemic. Pretty please?" Stephanie's eyes narrowed. "Anemic? Max, when was the last time you even logged into your university portal, let alone attended a class? This endless stream of parties, the racing. When are you going to start thinking about something other than your next thrill?" Here we go with the lecture series," Max groaned, rolling his eyes dramatically. "It's just, there's this art exhibition next week. Bill's actually got a piece in it." He glanced at his father for support. Bill, roused by the mention of his work, perked up. "Indeed. A pivotal showing, Stephanie. The curator is very intrigued. I might need a little something for framing and presentation, you know. Stephanie felt a familiar wave of weariness wash over her. Bill, with his perpetually unrealized artistic dreams, and Max, with his insatiable appetite for her money. How had she become the sole provider for two grown men who seemed incapable of contributing anything but expenses and headaches? She thought of the endless nights she'd spent poring over contracts, the crushing weight of responsibility, and then of Bill, and the whispers, the unexplained late nights, the scent of unfamiliar perfume clinging to his clothes sometimes. A familiar bitterness rose in her throat. "Fine, Bill," she said, her voice flat. "I'll make the transfer." She stood abruptly. "Excuse me." As she walked towards the house, the image of Bill's smiling, oblivious face and Max's expectant one burned in her mind. This couldn't go on. The clatter of cutlery and the murmur of lunchtime chatter at the Palm provided a welcome distraction, but only for a moment. Stephanie swirled the Chardonnay in her glass, the cool liquid a stark contrast to the simmering resentment she felt. Across the crisp white tablecloth, her two closest friends, Charlotte and Ella, watched her with knowing eyes. "Darling, you look like you haven't slept in a week," Charlotte, ever flamboyant in a leopard print dress, observed, her voice dripping with theatrical sympathy as she raised her own glass in a mock toast. "Another crisis in the Davenport Empire?" Stephanie forced a smile. "Just the usual whirlwind. You know how it is. Sometimes, in this endless hustle, there's hardly time for the people who actually matter." Ella, pragmatic and sharp in a tailored pantsuit, meticulously sliced into her seared tuna steak. "How do you do it all, Steph? Running that behemoth of a company, and then, well, dealing with Bill and Max?" She paused, then added delicately, "Honestly, sometimes I just want to pack a bag, buy a one-way ticket to somewhere remote, and tell the world to find someone else to pester." Stephanie laughed, a genuine laugh this time, though tinged with a hint of hysteria. "You read my mind. My darling men show absolutely zero interest in pitching in. One's off to the races, literally, and the other vanishes into his art studio for days on end, producing, well, not much that pays the bills." "Maybe it's time to cut the purse strings?" Charlotte suggested, her eyes gleaming with a mischievous glint. "Let them fend for themselves for a bit. They're not exactly children, are they?" A shadow crossed Stephanie's face. "It's complicated." Ella put her fork down, her expression turning serious. "Stephanie, forgive me for being blunt, but I saw Bill again the other day, downtown, near that new gallery. He was with, well, she was very tall, very blonde, and definitely not you." Ella's voice was low, her gaze direct. "How much longer are you going to let him get away with this, Steph? He's taking your kindness for weakness." The air chilled. Stephanie felt a cold dread seep into her bones, even though Ella's words merely confirmed her own long-held suspicions. The casual affairs, the lies. She'd tried to ignore them, to tell herself it didn't matter, that her focus was the business, her legacy, but hearing it spoken aloud, so plainly by a friend, it was like a slap in the face. Perhaps you're both right," she murmured, her appetite gone. The image of Bill with a faceless blonde laughing while she toiled to keep their lavish lifestyle afloat was a bitter pill. Charlotte, sensing her friend's distress, quickly changed the subject, steering the conversation towards upcoming charity galas and exotic travel plans. The rest of the lunch passed in a haze of forced cheerfulness, but Ella's words and the truth behind them echoed in Stephanie's mind. This afternoon with her friends, meant to be a respite, had instead solidified a terrible, burgeoning resolve. The city lights had just begun to twinkle against the bruised twilight sky when Stephanie awoke the next morning, long before her alarm. The pre-dawn silence of her bedroom was broken only by the frantic thrumming of her own heart, a drumbeat heralding the colossal importance of the day ahead. Today was the day that could catapult Davenport Transcontinental from a national powerhouse into a global legend. Or, she thought with a shiver, the day it could all stall. She rose, slipping on a silk robe, the cool fabric a stark contrast to the heat of anxiety coiling in her stomach. Downstairs, in the vast silent kitchen, she went through the motions of making coffee, her reflection in the dark window a study in strained determination. Her eyes, usually so full of command, held a flicker of fear. This contract wasn't just about millions. It was about validation, about proving to herself, and perhaps to the ghost of her father, that she was more than just the heiress. She was the architect. The man she was meeting, Peter Startling, was a ghost from her past, a childhood confidant, now a formidable player in the international finance scene. They'd shared scraped knees and whispered secrets under starry summer skies decades ago. Now, he held a key to her future. A wave of nostalgia, surprisingly potent, washed over her. What had he become? The boy who'd once dared her to climb the tallest tree in the park? Was he still in there, beneath the bespoke suits and the steely reputation? Bill's voice, thick with sleep, startled her. He shuffled into the kitchen, yawning and stretching like a contented cat. "Morning, sunshine," he mumbled, reaching for the milk. "Didn't expect you to be up with the sparrows." "Good morning," Stephanie replied, her voice carefully neutral. "It's a big day, too much on my mind to sleep." "You look a little wired," Bill observed, peering at her over his glass of milk. "Don't worry, Steph, it'll be fine. You always pull it off." He gave her a quick, absent-minded peck on the cheek, his mind already drifting towards his studio, his masterpieces. "Well, back to the grindstone for me," he announced cheerfully, oblivious to the irony. Stephanie watched him go, a sigh escaping her lips. His blissful ignorance was almost a comfort, in a twisted way. At least she didn't have to manage his anxieties on top of her own. She finished her coffee, the bitter brew doing little to settle her nerves, and headed to her dressing room. Today demanded armor. She selected a charcoal gray power suit, its sharp lines and impeccable tailoring a reflection of the professionalism and unshakable confidence she needed to project. The fate of her empire, and perhaps her own carefully constructed world, hung in the balance. The private dining room at Per Se exuded an air of hushed opulence. Stephanie had arrived early, a tactical move to center herself, choosing a table with a commanding view of Columbus Circle. The city sprawled below, a concrete jungle she had in many ways conquered. Yet her palms were unaccountably damp. As she smoothed an imaginary wrinkle from her skirt, a familiar silhouette appeared in the doorway. Taller, broader, but unmistakably him. "Peter?" she breathed, a genuine smile, the first in what felt like ages, lighting up her face as she rose. His eyes, a startling clear blue she remembered from sun-drenched childhood afternoons, widened in delighted recognition. "Stephanie Davenport, my God, look at you! You're stunning!" He moved towards her, his handshake firm, yet warm. "You actually recognize me?" She laughed, a lightness bubbling up inside her, momentarily chasing away the pre-meeting jitters. "Recognize you? After all those summers we practically lived in each other's pockets? Then you vanished off to law school and poof, lost to the ages," he chuckled, his gaze filled with an admiration that felt different from the usual business appraisals she endured. "That was a lifetime ago," she mused, the years melting away as they took their seats. "So," Peter began, his smile softening into a more serious, appraising look once the waiter had departed. "Stephanie Davenport, head of a logistics empire. I always knew you were a force to be reckoned with, even when you were just bossing me around the treehouse. When I heard you were running the show, I wasn't surprised in the least." A warm flush spread up Stephanie's neck. "Thank you, Peter. That means a lot." She paused, taking a fortifying breath. "But let's get down to business, shall we? This contract, it's pivotal for both of us." And just like that, they were no longer childhood friends, but two seasoned professionals. Peter, it turned out, was as sharp and meticulous as his reputation suggested. They dissected the proposal clause by clause, Stephanie's initial nervousness giving way to the familiar thrill of negotiation. He challenged her, she parried, they found common ground. Hours flew by, filled with intense discussion, strategic planning, and surprisingly, moments of shared laughter. "This particular indemnity clause," Peter said, tapping a section with his pen, "it's robust, I'll grant you. But I think we can refine the language here to offer slightly more mutual protection, don't you?" Stephanie leaned in, her brow furrowed in concentration. "You're right. she conceded after a moment's thought, making a quick note. That phrasing actually strengthens our position as well. Clever. The ease between them was astonishing, a seamless blend of past camaraderie and present professionalism. Finally, after what felt like an eternity and no time at all, Peter picked up his pen. With a flourish, he signed. Stephanie watched, a wave of profound relief washing over her. It was done. The international stage was set. Excellent, Peter declared, a broad, satisfied grin spreading across his face as he extended his hand across the table. I'm genuinely thrilled we're going to be working together, Stephanie. Me too, Peter, she replied, her handshake firm, her voice resonating with a newfound lightness. I have a feeling this is the beginning of something monumental. The tension that had gripped her for weeks finally uncoiled, leaving in its wake a giddy sense of accomplishment. Well, a deal of this magnitude deserves a proper celebration, wouldn't you say? Peter's eyes twinkled. I know this fantastic little speakeasy just a few blocks from here. Dim lights, great jazz, even better scotch. What do you say? Stephanie hesitated for only a heartbeat. The thought of returning to her silent, empty mansion, or worse, to Bill's oblivious cheerfulness, suddenly felt unbearable. I'd love to, she found herself saying, a genuine smile playing on her lips. It's been far too long since I allowed myself to just unwind. The bar was a hidden gem, all dark wood, plush velvet, and the soulful lament of a saxophone. They settled into a secluded booth, a bottle of vintage Bordeaux breathing between them. The conversation flowed as easily as the wine, drifting from childhood escapades, the infamous tadpole incident, the disastrous attempt at building a raft, to their present lives, their ambitions, their quiet struggles. You know, Peter, Stephanie confessed, swirling the deep red liquid in her glass. I can't remember the last time I just sat, talked, without an agenda. Thank you for this. He chuckled, a warm, rumbling sound. Remember that time you dared me to eat that entire jar of pickles on a $5 bet, and then I spent the rest of the afternoon green? Of course I remember, Stephanie laughed, the sound unburdened and bright. You were so dramatic, but then you won the pie-eating contest the very next week, so you got your revenge. But I always wanted to be your champion even back then, Peter said, his voice softer now, his gaze lingering on her face. You always were, in your own way, Stephanie admitted, a warmth spreading through her that had nothing to do with the wine. It meant more than you know. The air between them thickened, charged with unspoken words, with the weight of years and the spark of something new. Time seemed to melt away, each shared memory, each easy laugh, weaving a new thread in the tapestry of their reacquainted friendship. When Peter finally insisted on driving her home, the city lights blurring past the car window felt like a dream. Thank you, Peter, for everything, for today, she said softly as they pulled up to her imposing gates. I really needed this. The pleasure was all mine, Stephanie, he replied, his smile genuine. Until soon? Until soon, she echoed, stepping out of the car, a strange sense of hope, and a curious flutter in her chest, accompanying her into the silent house. The dawn following her triumphant deal with Peter found Stephanie not with a hangover, but with a steely, unprecedented resolve. The encounter, the success, his genuine warmth, it had all acted as a clarifying agent, cutting through the fog of obligation and resentment that had clouded her judgment for years. No more. Her family, her husband and son, had mistaken her generosity for an endless, unconditional wellspring. It was time to turn off the tap. Her phone began to buzz before she'd even finished her first cup of coffee. Bill, then Max, then Bill again. She let them go to voicemail, a small, almost cruel smile playing on her lips as she pictured their bewildered outrage. When Bill finally got through, his voice was a mixture of affront and confusion. Steph, what in God's name is going on? The gallery called. The funding for my exhibition, it's been rescinded, and my cards, they're not working, he sputtered, panic lacing his usually languid tone. Bill, Stephanie said, her voice calm, almost detached. I've explained this. We need to reassess our expenditures. The company requires significant reinvestment, and I can no longer subsidize. non-essential projects. Non-essential? My art is non-essential? He choked out. This is outrageous. I contribute. I work. I know you do, Bill, and I've always appreciated your creative pursuits, she lied smoothly. But priorities must shift. The business comes first now. She ended the call before he could launch into another tirade, a tremor of liberation running through her. Next, Max. His call was less bewildered, more petulant fury. Mom, are you serious? You cut off my allowance? My cards are declined. What am I supposed to do? His voice cracked, with the indignation of a king dethroned. Max, darling, Stephanie began, the endearment dripping with newfound irony. It's time you focused on your education, or perhaps even considered getting a job. The party, it seems, is over. This is insane. You're just trying to control everything, he yelled into the phone, the sound tinny and distant. No, Max, she replied, her voice dangerously quiet. I'm trying to encourage you to finally take responsibility for your own future. She hung up, the silence in her office suddenly feeling powerful, charged. Later that day, the door to her office burst open, and Max stormed in, his face flushed, his expensive sneakers squeaking on the polished marble. How could you do this to your own son? He demanded, skipping any pretense of a greeting. Stephanie looked up from her quarterly reports, her expression unreadable. Max, you're a grown man. It's time you started acting like one. How can I think about anything when you're micromanaging every cent I spend? He raged, pacing her office like a caged animal. I don't want to control your life, Max, Stephanie sighed, a genuine weariness in her voice now. I want you to have a life, one that you've built, one that has meaning beyond the next party. Words, just empty words, he spat, before turning on his heel and slamming the door behind him, leaving Stephanie alone with the reverberations of his anger and her own quiet, unyielding decision. It was a gamble, she knew, a painful, necessary severing. But as the silence settled, a flicker of something like hope ignited within her. Perhaps, just perhaps, this was the shock they needed. The confrontation with Max had been uglier than she'd anticipated. His parting glare, filled with a potent mix of fury and wounded entitlement, had unexpectedly shaken her. As he'd stormed out, a wave of dizziness had washed over Stephanie. The immense stress of the past few days, the emotional turmoil of her decision, the years of suppressed frustration, it all converged. The room tilted, her vision blurred, and she felt her knees buckle. The last thing she remembered was the cool, hard floor rushing up to meet her. When she opened her eyes, the sterile white ceiling and the insistent beeping of a monitor told her she was in a hospital. A kindly, silver-haired doctor was jotting notes on a clipboard, his expression professionally placid. Mrs. Davenport? You gave us quite a scare. You fainted. Seems the immense pressure you've been under has taken a toll. A mild cardiac episode triggered by stress. We'll need to keep you for observation for a couple of weeks. Run some tests. A cardiac episode. The words hung in the air. Stephanie's mind, however, was already racing, not with fear for her health, but with a sudden, audacious idea. A desperate, perhaps even cruel stratagem began to form. Doctor, she said, her voice weak but firm, could I ask a favor? A very significant one? He raised an eyebrow, surprised. Of course, Mrs. Davenport, anything within reason. Please, she whispered, don't tell my husband or my son the full truth. Don't mention the heart. Just say, it's serious, very serious. The doctor looked at her, a flicker of understanding, or perhaps pity in his eyes. He nodded slowly. As you wish. Later that evening, when Bill finally arrived, his face a carefully constructed mask of concern, Stephanie was ready. She lay back against the pillows, feigning an exhaustion that wasn't entirely an act. Darling, he began, perching on the edge of her bed. I came as soon as I heard. How are you feeling? What did the doctors say? Stephanie took a shaky breath, summoning every ounce of her acting ability. Bill, she began, her voice trembling convincingly. There's something I have to tell you. She paused for dramatic effect, a tear, surprisingly easy to produce, escaping the corner of her eye. It's cancer, Bill. Stage 4. They say there's nothing they can do. Not much time left. Bill's reaction was a masterpiece of feigned shock and sorrow. "Stephanie, my love, I don't know what to say." He grasped her hand, his touch cool, but behind the performance Stephanie saw it, a flicker, almost imperceptible, of something else in his eyes. Relief? Calculation? "Is there anything I can do? Anything you need? And have you thought about the will?" The question, so callous, so immediate, struck her like a physical blow. Yet it also sent a chilling thrill of vindication through her. Her gamble, her terrible play, was already yielding its bitter fruit. He was everything she suspected. She had to see this through. Perhaps, she thought with a desperate fading hope, this shocking news would somehow jolt both Bill and Max into a semblance of humanity, make them realize what they were about to lose. Maybe they would finally step up. The performance had begun. Days bled into a monotonous routine of bland hospital food and the hushed footsteps of nurses. Bill's visits became less frequent, his initial show of concern morphing into a kind of restless impatience. He'd bring flowers, offer platitudes about fighting, but his eyes always seemed to dart around the room, as if assessing its contents. Or perhaps calculating his future without her. The question about the will, uttered so callously on that first night, echoed in Stephanie's mind, a constant, bitter refrain. He'd shown his hand, and it was a grasping, greedy one. Max, however, was a gaping void. He didn't come, not the next day, nor the day after. Stephanie's calls went straight to voicemail, each unanswered ring a fresh twist of the knife in her already aching heart. The boy she had raised, indulged, loved despite his flaws, couldn't even be bothered to visit his supposedly dying mother. The disappointment was a physical ache, heavier than any feigned illness. Had she truly meant so little to them? Had their lives revolved so entirely around her checkbook that her actual existence was merely an inconvenient precursor to their inheritance? One afternoon, shuffling down the corridor for a bit of exercise, her IV stand clicking beside her, Stephanie overheard snippets of conversation from the nurse's station. That poor woman in 302, terminal cancer, heard her husband and son have practically abandoned her. The words, impersonal yet devastatingly accurate, struck her with the force of a physical blow. She felt tears well, hot and shameful, but blinked them back fiercely. Returning to her room, she stared out the window at the indifferent city skyline. The sun shone, life went on, oblivious to the charade playing out within those sterile walls, and the very real heartbreak it was causing her. Her assistant, Jennifer, was a small beacon of loyalty in the encroaching darkness. She visited daily, bringing not just work updates, but also a genuine warmth that Stephanie desperately craved. "Mrs. Davenport, everything at the office is under control," Jennifer would say, her voice a soothing balm. "You just focus on getting better." Stephanie would nod, managing a weak smile, touched by the younger woman's dedication. She hadn't told Jennifer the full extent of her deception, only that she was seriously ill and needed to delegate. But Jennifer's unwavering support was a stark contrast to her family's cruel indifference. The lines were being drawn, the true colors revealed. Bill's superficial concern, Max's utter abandonment. It was a bitter pill, but one Stephanie knew she had to swallow to see the path ahead clearly. Her desperate hope that her illness would spark some change in them had withered and died. They had made their choice, and in doing so, they had inadvertently helped her make hers. The quiet monotony of Stephanie's hospital room was shattered one afternoon by a light, hesitant knock. She turned her head, expecting a nurse, and her breath caught in her throat. Standing in the doorway, a ridiculously large bouquet of crimson roses in his arms, was Peter Startling. A slow smile spread across his face, crinkling the corners of his kind eyes. "Well, hello there, sleeping beauty. Mind if I come in?" he asked, his voice a warm, welcome intrusion. Stephanie's heart gave an uncharacteristic lurch. She instinctively smoothed her hair, a flush rising to her cheeks. "Peter, what? How?" "Don't even try," he chuckled, stepping into the room, the vibrant color of the roses instantly brightening the sterile space. "You look incredible, even in hospital chic." He placed the flowers on her bedside table. The roses are magnificent, Peter. Thank you, she managed, feeling a warmth spread through her that had nothing to do with her feigned fever. He pulled up a chair, his presence filling the room with an unexpected sense of comfort and something more. I spoke with your doctor, he said gently, taking her hand. His touch was firm, reassuring. He, explained the situation. About the operation you need. He says your chances are excellent, so we fight. Together. Stephanie stared at him, stunned. An operation? He knew? But not about the cancer charade. Or did he? His words were carefully chosen. Jennifer must have told him about her real cardiac issue, the one that had precipitated this whole drama. Thank you, Peter. But you don't have to do this. This isn't your burden. Hey, he interrupted softly, his thumb stroking the back of her hand. I get to decide what my burdens are, okay? You have surgery coming up. You need to prepare, mentally and physically, and I promise you, I'm not going anywhere. I'll try my best to get better quickly, Stephanie whispered, a wave of emotion threatening to overwhelm her. The contrast between Peter's unwavering support and her own family's callousness was staggering. He squeezed her hand. I know this is tough, but you're the strongest woman I know. We'll get through this. His gaze was intense, unwavering. You were always so reliable, Peter. I don't know what I'd do without you, she confessed, her voice thick. My own husband, my son, they've barely been here. They answer my calls less and less. I'll always be here, he stated, his voice resonating with a conviction that settled deep in her soul. We lost so many years, Stephanie. It's time to make up for lost time. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the unspoken understanding a palpable presence in the room. How did you find out I was here? She finally asked. Jennifer called me, Peter explained. She was worried, said you needed a friend. I came as fast as I could. Jennifer, she's a true gem, Stephanie murmured. I'd like to be more than just a friend, Stephanie, Peter added, his voice dropping, his gaze searching hers. I've always admired you, that fiery spirit, that brilliant mind. You always captivated me. Tears pricked Stephanie's eyes. She turned away, embarrassed by her sudden vulnerability. Peter gently turned her face back towards him. Don't hide, he murmured. You're allowed to feel whatever you need to feel. It's just, I've tried to be so strong for so long, she whispered. And now, I just don't know. You're not alone anymore, Peter repeated, his voice a lifeline. I'll help you through this. The day of the surgery arrived, cloaked in the sterile chill of an early hospital morning. Peter was there, a steadfast presence by her side, his hand holding hers as the nurses prepped her. His quiet confidence was an anchor in her sea of anxiety. It's going to be okay, Stephanie, he murmured, his eyes locking with hers. I believe in you. Your faith means everything, Peter, she whispered back, squeezing his hand tightly before they wheeled her towards the operating room. His last words before the doors swished shut echoed in her mind. I love you, Stephanie. That phrase, a tender, unexpected gift, stayed with her until the anesthesia pulled her under. Hours later, in the hushed quiet of the recovery room, Peter was the first face she saw. He looked tired, but his smile was radiant. You did it, Steph, he whispered, stroking her hair. I knew you would. Her heart, mended by skilled surgeons and warmed by his devotion, felt lighter than it had in years. Peter, she managed, her voice raspy, you said you loved me? He nodded, his eyes shining. More than anything. I think I've loved you my whole life, Steph. Never even married. No one else ever came close. The following weeks were a blur of recovery, with Peter as her constant companion. He read to her, brought her contraband gourmet takeout, and filled her room with laughter and stories. They talked for hours, rebuilding the bridge of their lost years, discovering the adults they had become, and realizing the depth of the connection that had always simmered beneath the surface. Once she was strong enough, Peter whisked her away to a secluded beachfront cottage in the Hamptons. The salty air and rhythmic crash of waves a perfect balm for her healing body and soul. Welcome to your recovery oasis, he announced, carrying her over the threshold with a playful grin. They spent idyllic days walking along the shore, collecting seashells, and watching fiery sunsets paint the sky. One evening, wrapped in a soft cashmere throw, they sat on the dunes, a bottle of champagne chilling in a silver bucket beside them. "I thought I'd lost everything, Peter," Stephanie confessed, gazing out at the moonlit ocean. "But you showed me there's still so much to live for, so much joy to be found." "You never lost me, Stephanie," he said softly, turning her to face him, "and we have a lifetime of joy to catch up on." He leaned in, and his kiss was like the ocean, vast, deep, and utterly consuming. It was a kiss that promised forevers, a seal on their shared future. The ghosts of her past, Bill's betrayals, Max's indifference, seemed to recede with the tide, leaving only the brilliant, hopeful horizon of a life reborn, a love rekindled. This wasn't just recovery, it was a renaissance. Months later, Stephanie Davenport was a woman transformed. The successful heart surgery had mended more than just an organ. It had fortified her spirit. The coastal retreat with Peter had been a crucible, forging their love into something unbreakable. She returned to the helm of Davenport Transcontinental, not just restored, but radiant, with Peter, now her partner in business and life, by her side. The company flourished under their combined vision. Then, the call came from her lawyer, Mr. Wilson. "Stephanie," his voice was grave, "they're here. Bill and Max, they're eager to discuss the estate." A cold smile touched Stephanie's lips. "Excellent, Mr. Wilson. I'm on my way." This was the confrontation she'd been anticipating, the final act of her elaborate play. As she approached the polished mahogany door of the notary's conference room, she could hear their voices, loud and greedy, already carving up her empire. "The lake house is definitely mine," Max was saying, his voice filled with unearned confidence. "And Dad, you can have the majority shares. Fair's fair, right?" "Of course, son," Bill chuckled, a smug sound. "Though I wouldn't mind that vintage Aston Martin from her collection." Stephanie pushed open the door. The chatter ceased abruptly. Bill and Max stared, their jaws slack, their faces paling to a sickly white. You're supposed to be dead," Bill stammered, scrambling to his feet, knocking over a water glass. "Surprise, boys," Stephanie said, her voice like chilled steel. She glided to the head of the table, Peter a silent, imposing figure beside her. She looked from Bill's stunned face to Max's gaping disbelief. My, such ghoulish eagerness. "Tell me, Bill, were you always this mercenary? Or did my money just bring out your true colors? And you, Max, not even a single visit to your dying mother. I must say I didn't expect such profound indifference, even from you." She let the silence hang, heavy and accusatory. "Yes, I deceived you. There was no terminal cancer. I had heart surgery, a serious one, but one I was expected to survive. I needed to know, you see. Needed to see who you truly were when you thought the gravy train was ending." Max finally found his voice, a reedy, incredulous whisper. This is some kind of sick joke. You can't have done this to us." Peter placed a comforting hand on Stephanie's shoulder. "What's this charade about?" Max sneered, trying to regain some composure, though his eyes darted nervously between Stephanie and Peter. Stephanie slid a sheaf of legal documents across the polished table. Eviction notices. Account freezes. "Oh, but I can, and I have," she said, her smile devoid of warmth. "The house? You have 30 days to vacate. Your accounts, frozen, the cars, they remain in my garage. Consider your allowances, your access, your entire parasitic existence permanently terminated." "How dare you?" Bill blustered, his face mottling with rage. "After all the years I endured." "Endured?" Stephanie laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. "Endured my financial support while you squandered your days and entertained your conquests? No, Bill, I endured. I endured a husband who treated me like an ATM and a son who saw me as nothing more. But no more." She stood tall and resolute, Peter's hand finding hers. "I had a choice. Live a lie or build a new truth. I chose truth. And I found a man who loves me, not my balance sheet." Bill and Max sat in stunned, impotent silence, the reality of their ruin crashing down upon them. Stephanie, without a backward glance, walked out, Peter's arm securely around her. The door clicked shut on her past. 6 months later, Stephanie Davenport became Stephanie Sterling, her wedding to Peter a joyous celebration of love, resilience, and a future brighter than she could have ever imagined. The empire was secure, her heart was whole, and for the first time in a very long time, Stephanie was truly, unequivocally, gloriously free.